Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the OECD and the first public webinar of the Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches, the IFCMA for short. And you're going to learn about what that is shortly, hopefully. So this is on interoperable carbon intensity metrics. And just a quick bit of housekeeping very quickly at the start. This will finish at the top of the hour at 1:30 p.m. And please don't hesitate to put your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We will be recording this and it will be put on our website after this. And if you have any questions, we have our email in the slides here, so you can send us a question. Amelia, if you can just move to the next slide, please, and the one after. Just to quickly run through the speakers today, we have Alan Desser and Douglas Sutherland from the Economics Department. And just the next slide, Amelia, please. And we have Kirk van Dender from the Centre for Tax Policy Administration. And I'm Clodagh Power. I help run the IFCMA here at the OECD. Last thing is just to cover the agenda. Amelia, if you can go to the next slide, please. We are going to just run through the IFCMA. Alan's going to do that in a minute. And then we will provide some key insights on the work we've done on carbon intensity to date. That will be Kurt, Doug, and Alan. And then we'll have a panel discussion on the next steps for carbon intensity metrics. We have a great panel today. Thank you to everyone for joining us from all over the world. And then we'll just have a quick run through of upcoming work at the IFCMA, followed by a Q&A. So please don't be shy, put your questions in the box at the bottom, and hopefully we'll get to a couple of those questions before the top of the hour. So next will be Alan on the IFCMA. Thank you.
Thank you, Clodagh, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. It's great to see that there's a good attendance for this webinar. Indeed, if we can move to the next slide, just to say that before we turn to today's core topic, carbon intensity metrics, let me just briefly explain what the IFCMA stands for, because not everyone may be familiar with what this is doing. The Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches was launched in 2023 to build a stronger evidence based on countries' approaches to mitigation and their impacts, both domestically and internationally, as well as on the use cases and challenges related to carbon intensity metrics. Let me say first, it is an inclusive forum, and that means that membership is open beyond OECD. All participants engage on an equal footing, and decisions are taken by consensus. Our goal is just to bring as many perspectives as possible to the table so that the IFCMA's work is globally relevant and fosters practical peer learning across countries. Now, it is also multidisciplinary. In fact, we bring together climate, economic, and tax policy expertise to support a holistic approach, and in that sense, helping ministries to work together on these issues. One thing to clarify is that IFCMA does not negotiate or set standards. It's not meant to do that. Our focus is on technical work aimed at strengthening the evidence base for mitigation policies and on how they are implemented in practice. So in that sense, we are less about setting goals and more about implementation, providing analysis that can inform the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement processes, for example, including elements of the global stocktake and support NDC implementation. We therefore work closely with existing initiatives and institutions to avoid duplication and maximize synergies. And among the institutions that we work closely with include the UNFCCC, as I mentioned, but also the IMF, the World Bank, and WTO, all of which participate to the IFCMA as observers. Finally, our technical work on carbon intensity metrics also underpins many of the discussions taking place at the Climate Club. So we can move to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, our membership goes well beyond that of the OECD, as you can see from this slide. Yes, thank you. We currently have 60 members from across the world, including 40 G20 economies. If we can move to the next slide, please. Now, in a nutshell, what does the IFCMA do? We have organized the IFCMA's work into three blocks or categories, which are one, developing the IFCMA climate policy database. Second, assessing policy impacts. And carbon intensity metrics is the third element or third component. Just to give a quick brief elements on each of these. Under the IFCMA climate policy database, what we do essentially is collect granular information on the design of mitigation policies across IFCMA members. In that sense, the database provides really crucial insights into countries' approaches and importantly, instrument design, which enable mutual learning and helping identify gaps and overlaps in the policy landscape. Data collection is conducted by the Secretariat and follows a consensus-based typology. It represents a major step forward for comparability, addressing limitations of self-reported datasets where information is often inconsistent and not directly comparable. Second, under the assessing policy impact, three work streams address key knowledge gaps on the effectiveness of policies in actually reducing emissions. A modeling work stream combines sectoral and economy-wide approaches to produce granular, robust estimates of policies' domestic emission impacts. A spillover work stream analyzes cross-border effects on competitiveness, carbon leakage, and technology diffusion. An evidence synthesis workstream reviews and distills empirical findings on emissions impact and drivers of effectiveness, making them more accessible to policymakers. So this is a broad review of all empirical papers or findings that exist out there that are put together in this sort of meta-analysis. And together, these insights support the design of more effective policy packages that deliver strong emissions reductions while also supporting growth and competitiveness. Now, finally, under the carbon intensity metrics, which is the focus of today's session, we're developing solutions for calculating product level footprints and exploring how methods and frameworks can be made interoperable to limit compliance costs and avoid trade barriers. Let me just say a bit more words on this before I pass on to colleagues who will take you to a bit of more details in the recent work we've done. If we can move to the next slide, please. When it comes to one more slide, please. Well, first, just to mention that in this work stream, we've already produced a number of publications going back to November of last year, but also two papers that came out that dwell into the issues of what sort of database we have that already can be used, either public or commercial database, and what these database reveal in terms of trends if we use them to compute some carbon intensity matrix. That's a paper for June 2025. 2025, the first one. And the second one dwell a little bit more on the monitoring, verification, and reporting issues related to associated with carbon intensity matrix. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the carbon intensity metric, one question this is to ask is why do we need metrics, and especially why do we need them at the product level? And of course, one major reason is that there's many policies that will need such measures to be implemented or to function explicitly. That covers some policies like regulation that depends on some outcomes in terms of carbon intensity, be it for threshold or target to achieve. Public procurement is another example where you want to set criteria whereby you link one of the criteria to the carbon intensity of the product that are being used for public works. So these are some examples, but also we can think about providing guidance to investors, to consumers, enabling them to make choices, better informed choices if they want to help supporting emission reductions more globally. Next slide, please. Now, of course, this attempt or objective of getting a fairly granular and reliable product level carbon intensity metrics require some basic data, both of course on emissions and as well as defining output, so that and in a way that is as comparable as possible, so that it can be useful not only in one jurisdiction but across jurisdiction. And that of course in a context where many products are divided through complex supply chains, that raises some challenges, of course, of information sharing, of collecting information, having the technologies and to be able and some guidance on reporting to be able to get this data in a useful form. And in fact, what we see already is a lot of initiative that leads to emergence of different measurement and reporting standards across countries, and the associated risk of increasing compliance costs and raising trade to barriers. And of course, these challenges is more important, more relevant for smaller firms or firms in developing countries, which may not have as much means and capacity to navigate through all these requirements that are needed to collect comparable carbon intensity metrics. Next slide, please. So in our work, the initial part of our work was trying to establish some sort of principle, high-level principle that should guide the work on the carbon intensity metrics, on the development of comparable carbon intensity metrics. And essentially, we focus on three of such metrics. The first one is ensuring proportionality, which means striking a balance between the in some ways the accuracy and the resource requirements on the one hand to be able to capture those database, and again the type of burden this can impose. So really the trying to capture as broad as possible the whole set of emissions, but sometimes by focusing on some industries and being more demanding with respect to some industries is more important than trying to be totally accurate at the cost of having too high compliance requirements and cost. Second one is to do so in a way that doesn't compromise or diminish or hamper competition and innovation, or guide or dictate some technology choices, to leave it as much open as possible. And in some ways that means ensuring that this doesn't hamper cross-border trade, because trade is of course in itself one route through which we keep open markets, and these sort of desire or objective lead to maybe considering interoperability as one way to go, not trying to have to achieve full harmonization of metrics across different jurisdictions, but define a number of minimum criteria whereby different types of metrics can nevertheless talk to each other, can be translated into each other, so that there's enough comparability, but at the same time leaves flexibility in terms of the exact metric characteristics. So that, in a nutshell, this is basically where we're going, what we've achieved with our work so far on carbon intensity metrics. And with that, let me leave the floor now to my colleagues, Doug Sutherland and then Kurt van den Der, to get a bit more deeply into the work we've done.
So next slide, please. Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for everybody attending this presentation. What I'm going to do today is give you a quick run through of some of the work that we did in one of the reports that Alan mentioned that came out in June this year. And here we're trying to assess and compare selected data sources in the calculation of carbon intensity metrics. And the data we were using comes from three different sources. There's a CRU, which is a proprietary data source, as they're a business provider of information to particularly the heavy metals sector. We also use data from Climate Trace, which is an open source database, and this is largely based on satellite data augmented with other assumptions and knowledge about the various industries. And we were also fortunate to get data from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. Now, the scope of these data, or let's say the coverage of these data is very wide. We have thousands of installations across the world. And what we then did is start to calculate the carbon intensity metrics given these different sources. Now we come to some fairly high-level conclusions is for aluminium and steel, that we've seen that carbon intensity of production has been declining over the last couple of decades. Especially for aluminium, we can come back to why that's the case, and it's remained stable for cement. So on the left-hand side, you can see a graph showing the average carbon intensity either within countries or for country groupings. The top one is the most carbon intensive steel producer country, and the bottom the least carbon intensive. You see that IFCMA countries is in the middle block of three at the bottom, and that's showing that the reduction in carbon intensity being slightly greater in the IFCMA member countries. What you can also take from this is that the variation across countries is quite dramatic, from the lowest country to the highest country in particular. There are reasons for this, the reliance on clean technologies and energy sources being one of them. We'll come back to that. Next slide, please. So another way to cut the data is look at the variation in carbon intensity within a country or a group of countries. And here we're using a measure called the coefficient of variation, which is just trying to give you an indication of how different within a country, the carbon intensity of production is within a given country. And here you actually see that the IFCMA countries are, you've got the greatest variation, but that's largely reflecting that there has been movement in improving the carbon intensity of production. So you have some installations which are still relatively unreformed, and others coexisting with others which have been reducing their carbon intensity. And you see generally an upward trend in this variation when the country has got more decarbonisation efforts success. You'll see at the bottom that there's actually 5 labels and there's only 4 lines on the figure. This is because one country, the country with the lowest carbon intensity of production, also only has 1 installation, so there's no variation within the countries. If we did this same diagram for cement instead of steel, which is shown, that you'd see that all the variation is extremely similar across all the different country groupings that we show here. And that's essentially because everybody is using the same technology. Next slide, please. So what else can we do with these data? We used some more empirical measures to try and identify factors which are leading to the differences in carbon intensity of production in the different sectors. And here we report it for steel production. Now you see the results of the estimations, and I'll explain them just a little bit to give you a sense of what's going on here. You see that there's a 0 at the bottom and a vertical line from there, and that's essentially saying that if the estimate of the importance of the variable that we have labeled on the left-hand side has no effect, it'll be very close to that 0 line. Now, at the top of the figure, you see energy input, and you see 2 figures, one of the carbon intensity of power and the total power consumption rate. And you see that these have large effects on increasing the carbon intensity of production. So let's say for the carbon intensity of power, it would be the difference of using coal in your production process rather than electricity, which is based on renewable energies. That would make a huge difference in the metric. The second one, just the total consumption of power for the production, is also an important determinant of overall carbon intensity. You see that the other inputs have generally very small effects. And at the bottom, you have the type of production. And here they're using the share of electric arc furnaces as opposed to basic oxygen furnaces or blast furnaces, which are typically use coal or other carbon-intensive fuel source. And you see that the more that you have of electric arc furnaces, the lower your carbon intensity will be. So next slide, please. So what can we learn from this kind of analysis? I think that there's probably two big issues that these data can help us understand. The first one is that there are quite pronounced differences both across countries and within countries, and that suggests that there's opportunities to improve the carbon intensity or make greater progress in decarbonizing or reducing the carbon intensity of production. But we also understand that there is uneven progress, and that suggests that the opportunities are not being used. So what the question then says, what is holding back progress? It can be due to the large capital intensive nature of the production processes, so that financing is a big issue. It may, as we've already pointed out, it may be due to the energy system not being reformed. And so you're relying on an energy source which is using more coal than other countries or other areas within your country are using. And that is also an opportunity for reducing carbon intensity over time. The second area of lessons from this, when we started looking at the data from the three different sources are very good at identifying broad trends, and at a sufficient level of aggregation, they're quite similar. But as we go down to more granular data, as we go down to the installation level, that we see that there are some differences in levels in particular. And for policy purposes, having that uncertainty about exactly what level is, it makes it very difficult to base your, let's say, particularly a policy that imposes a financial obligation on these third-party data providers. And for that reason, we put more emphasis now in the provision of more granular and transparent data. And this is where we make the segue to Kurt, who's going to present next on the importance of the monitoring, reporting and verification systems. With that, I'll pass on to Kurt.
Thank you very much, Douglas. And yes, indeed, that's the slide for now, indeed. Another speaker, another accent, I could say, this time a non-native one. But I'll try to give you a flavor of the work that's been done so far in the context of the IFCMA on interoperability of carbon intensity metrics. Just to remind, Alain, a couple of minutes ago, spoke about three principles that we put forward in the context of this work. It's proportionality, should be pro-innovation and competition, and we should foster interoperability. Interoperability is about common foundations, is about communication across systems. And the concern, of course, is that proliferation of systems here could create complexity. Complexity can lead to high compliance costs. It can also create in itself uncertainty, and this is not particularly desirable. So what have we done so far to see to work on interoperability? Well, we looked at MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification systems for carbon pricing systems, mainly emissions trading systems. And we looked at these systems with the question, what would it take for these systems to become interoperable? What does interoperability mean for us here? Well, it's these systems being able to use each other's data. So data gathered in one system can be used in another. Well, that's going to avoid duplication and is going to keep reporting, monitoring, verification costs lower. We developed a framework to do that systematically, looking across the different systems. That framework describes the main components of MRV systems underlying these carbon pricing policies. And I'll give you an insight on what that framework looks like in a minute. But just to give a preview of the, emerging headline conclusion. Interoperability requires alignment, sufficient alignment, but it doesn't require full harmonization. So we can retain flexibility, we can retain diversity and still keep compliance costs low, even if there are many systems to work with. And that is a little bit the scope of what we do. The next slide gives us a look at that framework. If we can move to the next one. What components of MRV systems do we look at? Well, it's coverage. What are we monitoring? What do these systems monitor? It's estimation methods. How are emissions monitored? And then it's the reporting and verification framework. Coverage. What do these systems look at? Well, this is about sectors. Is it industry, power, transport, or maybe only some of these? What greenhouse gas emissions are covered by these systems? Is it only CO2, or is there also methane? Is nitrous oxide in there, or F gases in there? So we look at the scope, the coverage of these systems pertaining to the types of emissions they look at. And then on reporting boundaries, the question is at the level of the firm, what are firms asked to report? Is it on-site emissions only? Or does it also consider, does the system also consider emissions embedded in electricity? Is it combustion-based emissions only, or do we look at process emissions as well? So we look at what the different systems do in that space. Then on estimation methods, how are emissions monitored? Well, this can be done through looking at inputs, looking at outputs, so production volumes, and then use emission factors, or it can be done through direct measurement of emissions through probes. What approaches do the different systems take here? On reporting and verification, this is actually where we see that systems differ very strongly. Some systems rely on third-party verification quite systematically, comprehensively. Others work with thresholds, and still others work with random audits. So quite a big divergence in approaches taken there. Let's stay on this slide for a while, if we can. And then let me say a few words still about coverage. For definitions and correspondence, we look at maps. Can you map sectoral classifications in one system? Can you map it into the sectoral classification in a different system? What are the underlying definitions of the sectors there? For disaggregation and transformability, systems can cover different emission categories at the facility level. And there, the insight is not that surprising. The more disaggregated these emission categories are, the broader the scope is going to be for communication across systems. So if you disaggregate measurement within the system, and all systems do that, it will be easier to find common ground in the emission measurement across systems. So for example, one system only looks at fuel combustion emissions, the other system looks at combustion and process emissions. Well, if the second one measures combustion and process emissions separately, you can still make the two interoperable in that dimension at least. But that disaggregation in the second system is going to be costly, so it's not going to be entirely straightforward to provide all that disaggregation. When it comes to reporting and verification frameworks, well, as you see on the slide, a key concept here is mutual recognition. Mutual recognition makes exchange of information possible. This is not in itself a technical concept, but it's the principle of making accepting information from different systems as valid within your own system. So that's what mutual recognition means. So it's the acceptability of information from other systems in your own system. Of course, this can be informed by and ideally should be informed by technical considerations, but it's not in itself a technical concept. It's a decision to be made by the governance of the systems. So last slide, please, for me at least, is the next one. Next steps, we are continuing this work. What is the scope for interoperability? We look at methods for calculating reference values. We look at third-party verification of product-level carbon intensity metrics. And as was mentioned already, a significant challenge is data sharing along supply chains, and we're looking at approaches that are possible there. We are not the only ones active in this space. We work with colleagues in the OECD that do related work, the Trade and Agriculture Directorate, the Governance Directorate. We also work with the International Energy Agency, who are quite active in this space, and you see the various dimensions across which we collaborate there. We engage with other fora and initiatives, the Climate Club, the WTO, the COP presidency, all of these present in the seminar as well. And we also engage with private sector-led initiatives. So that was a very quick overview of what's happening in the interoperability space. And I think I hand over to Alain to start the panel debate. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Doug and Kurt, for this presentation. I suggest indeed we move straight to the panel discussion. We have a very nice panel with great panelists. If there are questions on what you just heard, they could be saved for the end. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes for the Q&A at the end, and so you could field some questions at that moment for the OECD. Let me first briefly introduce our panelists. We first have Emma Esbeth, who is Associate Professor at the School of Law and Associate Director of Research for the Australian National University's Zero Carbon Energy Initiative for the Asia Pacific. We have Eik O Lim, Director of Trade and Environment Division at the WTO. We have Jonathan Dredge, who's the Head of Policy and Strategy, Low Carbon Solutions with ExxonMobil. We have Lutz Morgenstern, who's Head of Division of the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany, and he's here representing the Climate Club. And last but not least, we have Marina Pitella, who's Head of Carbon Accounting Coordination Unit, Climate Action Division for the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she's here representing the COP30 presidency. So what we're going to do, we're going to go with two brief round of interventions with the panelists. Each of them will be fielded a question and make an intervention. We'll go to 2 rounds, and at the end of the 2 rounds, we'll keep Marina to do a sort of a wrap-up interventions and talk to us about the objective and expectations of the presidency, the COP30 presidency. So without due delay, let me start with the first questions for the first round of discussion, which we want to focus on the use cases and role of carbon intensity metrics in the transition. Let me turn to you first, Emma. Drawing on your extensive work at the nexus of trade and carbon intensity metrics, can you tell us a bit more about what are your key insights to date on the role of carbon intensity metrics in trade, and how you would expect their impact to evolve over the coming years? Over to you, and welcome to this panel.
Thanks, Alain. Lovely to be part of the panel. Thank you. I think it's always important when we start this conversation to recall that around a quarter of global emissions are embedded in internationally traded goods and services. So fundamentally, the point of these carbon intensity metrics is really to help us to eliminate those emissions over time, to get us to net zero by 2050. So there's a whole range of different use cases. You can think business customers use things like environmental product declarations in order to choose their upstream suppliers who may be in any different country and may in fact affect which country they choose from. Final consumers use low carbon or eco certification to make purchasing decisions. And of course, governments can use these metrics and the information in them to target a whole range of trade-related climate policies. So, of course, we get a lot of attention paid to the sort of the stick in the trade-related climate policy space of carbon border adjustments. But there are actually a whole range of carrots related to trade that governments can and do use that rely on these intensity metrics. So, for example, governments use them to target green industrial policy, to target their green procurement schemes. They use them to define goods for inclusion in sustainable investment taxonomies, or indeed for preferential tariff liberalisation. So there is a whole range of public and private initiatives that are really reliant on high quality information about carbon intensity in products. In terms of evolution over time, while we've had some setbacks in some jurisdictions, overall momentum is building. There has been so much investment over the last 10 and particularly the last 5 years in these initiatives. I think we're going to see them really coming into force, starting to have an effect. That effect will, of course, deepen over time as carbon prices rise in key markets. It will also become broader over time. As we've heard, a lot of emphasis has been placed on key upstream, high-intensity sectors, currently iron, steel, aluminium, and cement. But over time, we can expect to see these metrics and initiatives broadening out to other sectors and also going downstream more. So last but not least, whether these initiatives actually do drive fundamental changes in the way that products are made and fundamental decarbonisation, or whether they simply cause a marginal change and then increasing pressure in offset markets, that crucially depends on the integrity of the international regime that we create. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, for these insights, and very good point about industrial policies and the tendency to see more and more of these criteria in industrial policies at a time where we see an increase in the use of industrial policies and inevitably having impact for trade as well. Still on the trade issue, let me now turn to Echo from the WTO. Echo, the discussions on the role of carbon intensity metrics have of course also taken off at the WTO in the context of trade-related climate measures. Could you tell us how these discussions have evolved so far?
Thanks very much. Thanks, Alain. It's great to be here with you. Let me try to give you some sort of reflections from the WTO Secretariat on the types of discussions that have been taking place at WTO and continue to do so. A lot of ground has already been covered by the panel, but I think where I would come into this discussion is to be really looking at it from a trade perspective and quite anchored in trade. And here at the WTO, the membership discussion on methodologies has really been on emissions embodied in traded goods. So, there are many different terminologies being used out here, but I think that's quite an important one. So where they are coming into this discussion is really looking at understanding how the various methodologies can help us better understand the actual emissions embodied in traded goods, particularly in a landscape that is very difficult because, as we all know, proliferation of standards, fragmentation of methodologies, and so forth. So it's this translation from carbon intensity metrics to actually emissions embodied in traded goods, which has been really the focus of most of the discussions here at WTO. And why so? Again, it's quite clear: fragmentation of methodologies, different systems, different assumptions, different boundaries, all have implications for trade, costly for business, it's costly for consumers, and certainly for regulators. And very importantly, not just for trade, it's also important for climate action. We've seen that a lot of the uncertainty slows down to transition, and it holds back low emission trade and investment. So I think the reasons why are quite clear, but how do we go forward? What can we actually do? And here the discussion is really in the Committee on Trade and Environment. I think what's been interesting here is that, amongst the many different issues that are out there, this particular issue of looking at trade-related emission measures in terms of emissions embodied in traded goods has created some momentum between WTO members. In particular, you have Australia, Chile, Japan, Korea, and the UK. They've come behind a proposal to develop non-binding guidance on methodologies for measuring embedded emissions. It's a proposal. I mean, this is what they have put forward. Of course, we also hear from others who say that they're not ready yet to join, or maybe will never be ready, we don't completely know, to look at guidance. Where they prefer to continue on is with experience sharing without prejudging any outcome. But there have also been other proposals. I've only mentioned this one in the interest of time, and also because of the focus of your discussion here. We've seen a range of inputs from the LDC group, from China, and also from the US. Most of these, touch across a range of issues, from interoperability to measurements, to capacity building, technology transfer, and so forth. But maybe to zoom in more concretely for the panel on where we are today is that after having a series of thematic discussions, the Committee on Trade and Environment have narrowed the conversation down to three main areas. One which is on transparency, looking at what more members can do to share their methodologies and to look at how they can improve transparency, and in particularly looking at how this can fit into existing WTO processes. Second key area on development, what kind of cooperation, technical assistance, or access to finance and technology that can help developing members engage and benefit more from the transition. And lastly, it's really a feature of your discussion so far, interoperability, and looking here again from a trade focus, what the WTO can do to contribute to ensure that different approaches work together and that we minimize trade frictions and trade obstacles. So all of these three issues are now going ahead in a discussion under the Committee on Trade and Environment, where the chair of the committee has organized a day of interactive informal sessions. Actually, this is sessions between the members themselves, and it will actually take place on 16th October. So it's a new format, it's very exploratory, much more in the nature of small group exchanges, and hopefully we'll be able to get more information from these sessions. So let me stop here and then go back to you. Thanks, Anna.
Great. Thank you, Eiko. And it's really good to see that there are really good and engaging discussions at WTO, and also that I see that in terms of the item you seem to be focusing on quite a bit of synergies with the way we like to think about these issues. So thanks again for a nice overview of how things are developing. Now, the first two interventions focus on trade. Now, let's hear about maybe the industry perspective, especially the heavy industries, and how the decarbonization of these heavy industries from this perspective. So first, I will turn to Jonathan Dredge, and from ExxonMobil. Jonathan, starting with the business perspective, right? Just to, of course, remind that ExxonMobil is a multinational with multiple products. So why is it important for you to have comparable metrics across jurisdictions to support carbon accounting?
Great, thank you, Alan. Thank you for the question. So in addition to being sort of integrated through value chains, obviously we have a global portfolio. So just a reflection on the current carbon accounting landscape. It's really a patchwork of different standards, many of which weren't actually established for the purposes of accounting specifically, but more sort of corporate disclosures. And that range of different methods and approaches really limits comparability. And you've kind of touched on that on many of your earlier slides around interoperability of those standards. As well as that, I mean, when you're working across value chains, there are many data limitations that mean that companies have to rely on secondary data or estimates. And I think the ability to both compare and then also the integration of estimates really causes inconsistency in approaches. And that lack of verification and the ability to audit the approaches of different organizations across value chains really undermines trust in the system as a whole when you're looking across all different accounting approaches. And as Emma touched on, I mean, many products, if not most products we use globally, rely on complex value chains, global feedstocks, and they're traded globally on global supply chains. So we really need to see common accounting rules that enable verification of recognition of the carbon intensity across jurisdictions and across value chains. And a uniform, verifiable, consistent accounting approach would enable product differentiation. So looking at the carbon intensity of different products, enable that recognition and differentiation of the carbon intensity of those products. And that then would enable markets to assign value to that carbon intensity of the embodied emissions for those products. So the way we look at this when we're looking at a future state, and this will be known to many of you, we need harmonized requirements with clear sector-specific guidance. And we say sector-specific because sectors are very different in the way that they account, the way they may need to allocate for different processes, and the way that passes through value chains. And that needs to be consistent and accurate across a cradle-to-gate approach. That's the way we're looking at it. So each company can look at their product and pass through the carbon liability through the value chain. And that needs to be associated with a rigorous and recognized verification process. So again, that will underpin the legitimacy and the trust in the carbon accounting system. So when we're looking at this, it's a complete, accurate, comparable, verifiable accounting system. And that's needed to underpin any carbon policy at all. So our approach and the way we're proposing to solve this would be a ledger-based system that can leverage on the well-established and already accepted principles of financial accounting to develop a carbon accounting solution that can address many of the issues that we're seeing with the current landscape. So there's just a few points there, but I'm happy to discuss more.
Yeah, super. All right. Thank you, Jonathan. And now I'm turning to you, Lutz, representing the Climate Club. You know, the Climate Club and the IFCMA are working closely on carbon intensity issues since the start of both initiatives, with several IFCMA deliverables informing discussions of the Climate Club. Now, the question for you is how important is the role of carbon intensity metrics for decarbonization of heavy industries, and what would be your priorities in this area?
Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this very interesting and also very relevant discussion. I've enjoyed listening to the other panelists and to the presentations very much. So on the Climate Club and the role carbon intensity metrics have in our work, I will give two examples. And just for those who are not familiar with the activities, the Climate Club focuses on the heavy industry sector. As Jonathan just has mentioned, all sectors are a little bit different. So our approach is to focus on this specific sector and drive forward the measures that are taken in that sector. And the two examples of the relevance. First is the functioning of ETS systems. ETS systems have proven to be one of the most efficient policies also in the field of industry decarbonization. ETS often, and in the future even more, comes along with additional systems for border adjustment mechanisms. Some like it more, others like it less. I do not want to go into this debate at the moment, but it is happening. And that means policy mandated instruments are getting more and more. Complexity that has been described by colleagues also is getting higher. And in order to somehow navigate in this heterogeneous landscape, we need some kind of coordination, better understanding. So in the Climate Club, we work towards sometimes we call it political reference points or technical principles, but some kind of alignment that actually enables the interoperability that has been has also been very, very excellently explained. That is so important. So this is one field of work. Additional field of work, we do specific work on creating lead markets for green steel and green cement. And for these specific products, we also, in order to create these lead markets, we need clear definitions, and we also need policies that then create the demand for these products. And these these policies for demand, procurement measures is one example that has been mentioned, but there are many measures available. They also need definitions and standards, and for that again we rely on solid carbon intensity metrics. So this is why we think this work is very important, and we are grateful for all the methodological and substantial work that the IFCMA is doing. On the priorities, which you have also mentioned in your questions, we think that now the priority, after building up this dialogue, after improving the understanding, now the next step really is to get to decision making and prepare decision making. The Climate Club, as other initiatives, will not take binding decisions itself, but we are maybe one step closer to this process, really also negotiating non-binding statements within the Climate Club that somehow capture the joint understanding of the Climate Club members, that then can apply this understanding for their measures, domestic measures, where they actually then bring this action to the ground. And these, as I said, is now really the priority to take this step, because we of course we need all the methodological work that was explained, but then at the end you come to the point where it's not a question of methodology, it's rather a question of political decision making, and these political decisions need to be prepared and they need to be taken. And in that field, we try to take on a helpful role together with the 46 members of the Climate Club. Thanks.
Thank you, Lutz. And that sort of concludes the first round of interventions. Now, let's move to a second round, where we're going to focus on key issues that need further work, and in touching that, maybe the role of international cooperation in addressing some of these issues. So a little bit more focus on the obstacle to the cost effectiveness and inclusive use of carbon intensity metrics. So let me first go back again to you, Emma. From your perspective, what are the principal issues related to measurement of carbon intensity that can impact trade? And what are the low-hanging fruits that you could see that could ease potential trade friction? And if you can also mention something about the role of international cooperation in this context would be great.
Thanks, Alain. Yeah, so I think you already alluded to it in the earlier part of the presentation. There are two key ways that these metrics can affect trade. One is through providing high quality information about product carbon intensity. That information can help trade become fairer, more efficient, and more climate compatible. On the other hand, there could be negative effects on trade through frictions related to obtaining and communicating this information, particularly, as we've heard a couple of times, in the context of international or global supply chains that may cross multiple national borders. There is an element of trade-off between these two, as you alluded to with the idea of proportionality earlier, but I would argue this element is perhaps not as great as people might think. I think we could very easily end up with a international carbon intensity metric regime that is sort of low quality, has poor quality information and a whole lot of frictions. We equally, if we get things right, could have one that has high quality information and relatively low friction. And the low hanging fruit, which you and other panelists have alluded to, is really to obtain interoperability. And that, of course, requires cooperation. So exactly the sort of things that we've heard other panelists talking about through the WTO initiatives or Climate Club and also our industry initiatives, this sort of transparency and sharing information, agreement, I would argue, on the technicalities of the methodology is a really important first step. And I think more important than we often talk about people saying we need to align standards. I think of the standard as being a combination of methodology and a threshold for what is green and what is not green. And I would argue we will get a much more efficient, a much more politically palatable regime if we really put our efforts in the alignment of the methodologies and let people for their different initiatives in their own countries perhaps have a little bit more flexibility about those thresholds of what is green and not green. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great, thank you for this answer. Now turning to EcoLim, and I should say, mindful of the timing, we're already approaching the hour. We can stretch a little bit. That's no problem, at least on our side. Now, so if you could be brief in your answers for the second round, would be great. Now, Echo. The second question for you, what are the key technical issues that are being raised in the WTO in relation to the carbon intensity measurement, and how do you envisage WTO contributing to solutions?
Yeah, no, thanks, Alain. I think I've got two very broad points. I mean, the first one is actually not really a technical sort of response, but it's more about looking at the bigger picture, because I think it's linked to whether we get cooperation or not. And what's the bigger picture? I think the bigger picture is really putting front and center that there's huge opportunities here in the green transition for trade. So I think there has to be a way to put this forward in a way that's not just about more requirements, more standards, more measurements, more complexity. It's all there. We know the complexity and all the reasons for it is all there. But at the same time, I think, to get that cooperation, we need to also talk about why solving all of these issues can help bring about greater opportunities for the green transition, and particularly opportunities in developing countries. And how can developing countries themselves benefit from solving this problem of transparency, interoperability, and so forth. So, and I think we look at this more in terms of not barriers, but as keys. So what we want are keys that can unlock doors for more finance, more investment, more infrastructure, and all the basics that we need to have trade, essentially. And then my second answer to you, which is more technical, and it's more looking at exactly on your question, how can WTO help? Well, firstly, we're not starting from a blank page. We already have many agreements at WTO that are essentially trying to do similar things in different fields, basically reducing fragmentation and trying to help more on transparency and interoperability. One key agreement is the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, WTO agreement, which has in it 6 principles for development of international standards. And we can use these 6 principles more effectively in addressing some of the challenges mentioned here. I won't go into them, but just to mention, some sectors have already done so. The steel sector, with the World Steel Association and its partners, have been working on steel, and they use some of these 6 principles to help them move towards more cooperation. The other second point is simply about looking at some of the proposals that we have at WTO, the ones I mentioned earlier. They do raise a number of practical ways that they think could help. This is in terms of de minimis thresholds, default values, data protection, and how they can cooperate on this, and also on how to make the verification procedure smoother. And again, here we're not starting from scratch, because again, most of you trade people know a lot of work has been done on trade facilitation, which is a lot about making things smoother, essentially. And lastly, since you're short of time as well, of course, many people have talked about transparency, but I think we need to get to a more granular understanding in terms of what particular information do we need, and what are these information gaps that are there that are not already being provided. I know IFCMA is doing incredible work on this, so we look forward to learning from you as well. And within our context, we're also trying to take forward more of these transparency discussions. So let me stop there, and then thank you again for the opportunity to join the panel. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, and thanks for emphasizing the importance of reminding policymakers and the public more generally that this is not just about challenges. There's also enormous opportunities here that could help to give new waves into trade and to other developments. So thanks for reminding this. Now, I'm turning to you again, Jonathan, for this second round. And I was wondering, in your case, if you could tell us what are some of the key design characteristics that should be, in your view, considered to ensure carbon intensity is based, carbon intensity that is based policy is effective.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I think one of the fundamental points that we see at the moment is that the current territorial approach to emissions reporting and policy is really not driving the change we want to see and resulted in many jurisdictions with significant levels of carbon leakage. So in order to drive real change, you need to see that shift from territorial approach to something more consumption based, and that's in line with what we've been talking around today about assigning the embedded carbon to products. And we've seen policies as well. They've been highly effective at enabling small markets and first of a kind projects. But again, we need to see a shift to a market-based approach that really can drive the scale and pace of investment needed to meet societal goals. So I think a couple of areas of a shift that are needed. And we see that product level carbon intensity standards have been highly effective for other attributes in driving change for products. And a few of the design features, so to get specific on your question, that we have seen as highly effective in developing product standards have been around addressing sectors specifically. So making sure that you identify the key needs of those individual sectors and how you can drive change. To have gradual tightening. So rather than having a binary approach to introducing a change in a market and saying something's now zero carbon or sort of tagged as green, you have something that reduces through time gradually that can be introduced at a level that's affordable and acceptable to a society. And then a few of the other points are sort of technology neutrality is clearly a need. An ability to recognize overperformance through an element of tradability. So you have market-based principles there. And then pragmatism around design. That means that the administrative burden of any standard aligns with the outcomes, avoids issues around circumvention and substitution, product substitution. And then kind of the last point I'll make is around having a clear verification route for those standards. So linking back to our first question, there's that strong need for a ledger-based carbon accounting system to underpin all this. Thanks.
All right, thank you. This is very, very helpful and insightful. And now turning to you, Lutz, for this second round. I was wondering if you could describe a little bit the views across Climate Club members on this issue of carbon intensity-based policies and how you see the diversity of views coming together.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Very briefly, so on the views, of course, there are shared views among the members of this initiative, and the opportunities have already been mentioned, so I won't go into that, but it was very important to underscore this. There are also views on and shared concerns on the multitude of potentially incompatible approaches that might arise, and therefore the need to cooperate. Also on reporting burdens for firms who have to navigate in a landscape that is getting more complex, and also the challenges for developing countries, of course. And therefore, in the Climate Club, we have established a global matchmaking platform that particularly supports developing countries in their energy transition. But then on coming together, and this is the diversity, bringing them together, I think this is the most important point. And therefore, we need initiatives, and we do not need one single initiative. We need, I think, all these initiatives to bring countries together in a non-controversial way, to have open discussions, and ideally also based on very solid academic scientific input as a basis, as a neutral basis for this discussion. This also is been done in several initiatives. I think one of the challenges for the future is to bring the work of the individual initiatives even closer together as well. So not only bringing the countries together in an initiative, but also making sure that the work of the different initiatives and approaches is somehow speaking to each other and is aligned so that we can really make a difference. And in that sense, I'm really looking forward to listening to my Brazilian colleague who will speak at the end, because she might also, of course, the Brazilian COP presidency can offer some solutions for that. And we are actively engaging with them and looking forward also to their leadership in this regard. Thanks.
Good. Many thanks for this. And indeed, I'm now turning to Marina and thanking her for her patience. Marina, if you could give your perspective from the COP presidency. As we know that the Brazil presidency established several activation groups. Among them, one group focused on harmonizing carbon accounting standards. It also launched the Integrated Forum on Climate Change and Trade. So maybe just tell us, why does the presidency think this is such an important issue, and what are the outcomes you would like to achieve? Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning to all from Brazil. And thank you for the chance to share the work of the COP30 presidency under the umbrella of the Action Agenda. So, Alan, you mentioned well that we have put forward the topic, and the wording that we use is harmonizing carbon markets and carbon accounting standard under Activation Group 33. And I'm happy that Lutz mentioned the role of ETS and compliant carbon markets into this discussion. We are using also the terminology carbon accounting as an overarching framework to address the many applications that the term has. And I know that IFCMA has also put this forward. So it has applications for trade, it has applications for carbon pricing schemes, it has applications for driving forward a sustainable industrialization. And in this sense, we believe that moving forward, and we have also chose this word harmonization, but I understand that there are several other ways that we can put this. We can say convergence, we can say alignment, but I think the main point that we want to use COP30 as a forum to address the challenges, and I believe that the challenges have been very well addressed here by the panel. So the challenge that we have to move forward interoperability, to have a common language, and the need to have a common language for this metrics to actually work as a lever. And I really liked also what WTO has pointed out, that the main point is not to create more levels of reports or verifications, but actually through a common language to leverage the systems and to drive decarbonization and a low carbon economy. And this is also a point while into the context of the activation group, the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with the Brazilian Ministry of Finance, has put forward a proposal of 3 acceleration plans. The first acceleration plan is one on an open coalition for compliance carbon markets. So the idea is that we are in a landscape, and many countries are developing their own systems of ETS and carbon pricing schemes. And a particular context where many developing countries that have different emissions profile are developing their compliance carbon markets, and specifically also Brazil in this instance. And we felt that it's an important moment for these countries to come together to discuss how to have a long-term vision of integration of these carbon markets. And this long-term vision should be built towards things such as moving forward with the interoperability of MRV systems, so that different sectors can also have some sort of convergence on how you measure the emissions at installation level, at product level. So we are addressing this as a whole. And the second acceleration plan is on the harmonization of carbon accounting standards. And I think the main goal here that we proposed is actually to put forward the action agenda as a platform where existing initiatives and different sectors could discuss. So the goal of the specific acceleration plan is twofold. One is to present the challenges that we have, and we feel important that this is done at the level of UNFCCC COP. We understand that there is a broader agreement into this, but this is the first time that this is actually taken into space at COP level. And the second point is to actually point in a few directions where we should work. But we understand this is a work that will take time. It has a relation, as you mentioned, now to other streams of the action agenda. So I want to mention two. The first one you mentioned is that the proposal of the Integrated Forum on Climate and Trade. The president of COP30 has presented this at the public forum of WTO. The idea is to build a space that is not negotiated, not binding, but will serve to build up ideas and build trust into climate and trade issues, and that carbon accounting is placed one as the key work programs that we should build upon this. So this was presented, and we are reaching out for countries also to join as we're reaching out also in the context of the Open Coalition of Compliance Carbon Markets. And third one that we should mention is there is an activation group dedicated to climate integrated public procurement, and the role that governments can play, drive in public procurement towards sustainable industrialization, but also not in the sense of only converting hard to abate industry, but also building those kinds of industry, building a bioeconomy industry, building an industry that utilizes biogenic carbon, but it's actually matching this long-term vision that we all share of net zero 2050, and not only a vision, actually a shared goal that we have. So this is a rough sketch of how we are approaching the work, and I appreciate very much that also the inputs that you have always gathered from the work that the IFCMA has done, and also in the interaction with Climate Club. So the idea is really to bring forward what is existing in this space, and possibly build a space where all these different actions and initiatives and sectors can converge. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for this overview. Very helpful and insightful to see where things are going, and from your perspective. Okay, before we're of course already run beyond our time, and I really thank all the panelists for staying on. We unfortunately Emma had to leave, but the other ones are still with us. Maybe I would do just two things. Just briefly turn back to my colleague Claudia, who will briefly just mention what the future work is coming from IFCMA, and maybe field one general question for whoever might be prepared to take it. Claudia, over to you.
Okay, yeah, just super quick because we're out of time. We have a slide here which we'll be distributing after this on upcoming work at the IFCMA. So you may remember Alan mentioned these three sort of umbrellas of the work streams that we're working on. I just wanted to flag two things. The first is that we will have a report to G20 finance ministers and central bank governors in mid-October. So to watch out for that on our website, because it covers the sort of breadth of the work that we're doing at the IFCMA. And then just to note, our next webinar will be on the 21st of November during COP30, and that will be on the climate policy database. So that's the green colouring on the left-hand side. And that's relating to the first version of the climate policy database. The dashboard for that will be released in December. And that's bringing together granular information for the first time on 43 different types of climate policies and climate relevant policies. in place across the IFCMA membership. And it's important to recall that we're working really closely with governments on that kind of work. And a lot of our work isn't out in the public and doesn't always take place in that sort of forum. So we're trying to do more webinars to get people familiar with what we're doing. And if you see the lists of the different work that's listed there, some are in grey because that's the work that we're doing directly with governments and might not necessarily come out into the public domain, but just to make people aware of what we're doing. So I think we have time maybe for just one question. We got lots of questions before the webinar as well, so thanks very much for the engagement. And hopefully we can also run another webinar on carbon intensity metrics or on other parts of the work streams in due course. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Clodagh, and maybe panelists, if I could keep you for maybe just one question, one general question, whoever among you wants to take it, could be more than one, of course. And the question is something that probably is in the mind or comes up in the discussion very often is, and it came from the audience, is how can one ensure that carbon intensity metrics take into account different country circumstances and realities faced by companies? So I don't know to what extent this comes up in your discussion. Maybe you, Aiko, in the context of WTO, this issue of different circumstances, different realities, how do you see this being handled in the WTO, or how it affects discussions?
My very quick response is that it's a shared responsibility. I mean, WTO, we can only do certain amount of this discussion, which is trade related. But to really get to grips with this, particularly if you're talking about on-the-ground reality, it's really about building the quality infrastructure in developing countries, for instance, but also in developed countries, because that quality infrastructure is what's needed for trade. And we know that for all traded products, we're talking here about from quality assurance, testing laboratories, and so forth. But think about that for carbon. What would be the carbon quality infrastructure? Many countries barely have a quality infrastructure that would help them with physical goods. And here we're going a step further. We're going into a production process based on carbon. So I think that's where a lot of thinking needs to go. And it needs a wide community. And maybe this is something the Climate Club colleague is really working on, because they are working on partnerships. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Heiko. Anyone else wants to intervene, Lutz or Marina, in the context of the? Okay, I see Lutz. Yeah.
If I may, very briefly, yeah, I mean, it's a very important question how to take into account these different circumstances. I think probably it cannot be solved via the standards itself or via the metrics, because, and I'm not taking the view of a country representative, but if I take the view of a company, a private buyer who wants to buy a ton of green steel, then the buyer probably doesn't want to know whether it was produced in Germany or in Brazil or in China, and however these different circumstances vary, and then how these may have led to different metrics. The buyer just wants to know whether he can actually use the steel as green steel, and then to his buyers, maybe if it's a car producer, he wants to certify, okay, I have used green steel, and he doesn't want. So we have to, the different circumstances, we somehow have to deal in other fields, and maybe the work on cooperation that I've briefly mentioned to support industry transition in developing countries. Maybe this can actually be a tool, because of course, there are different challenges that need to be addressed. But I would say, and this is maybe not the Climate Club's view, it's a German's view, that we cannot solve this via the metrics.
Thank you, Lutz. I don't know, Marina. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, just a really quick point. I think it's a very important point that the question that is, in our view, what is important is when we build a shared framework, that this shared framework will allow different mitigation pathways that countries can use, their different realities, their different context and different industrialization process to actually use metrics that are scientific based, but do not points towards a single solution. I think this is a very important point, that countries could explore a relevant solution that there are shared trust, that they are sustainable. And I think this is the real challenges, because the real challenge is to say, well, are these metrics geared towards a specific policy, so we build them to drive towards a specific policy, or do they exist to make a neutral assessment, and based on that we have a shared understanding? And this is a very important point, and I hope we can come to an agreement on the point of technology neutrality and the need of strong scientific backing for these assessments. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to be sure, Jonathan, I just want to give you a chance if you want to come in on this or more general point. There was a reference to different realities faced by companies. Yeah, up to you.
Yeah, just very quickly on the sort of design of a product standards. I mean, our view would be that each jurisdiction would determine the rate at which they want the greenhouse gas or emissions level of those standards to change through time based on affordability and technology deployment rates in those regions. And then in order to play in those markets, you would need to meet the standards. So it's very much within the control of the jurisdiction as to the rate and pace of which they want to decarbonize within the standard. And by having jurisdiction-based and sector-specific standards, that provides governments with quite a lot of control to tailor that and individualize how that standard is applied on society. So I think it's a real benefit of the product standard approach is that ability to fine-tune it.
Great, many thanks. A huge thanks to all the panelists. This has been a great discussion. Apologies. Well, great. Thank you for the audience as well for being there and listening throughout. Hoping that some of the questions that you fielded in the chat that we didn't have time to pass on to the panelists, that were, at least to some extent, addressed and answered through the really rich discussion that we've had. Thanks to colleague as well for organizing and participating to this webinar. We have plans to do more, so watch this space. But thank you again to all the 5 panelists. This was great. We appreciate your time and your interventions in this discussions. Do we close here, Claudia, or is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's it. Thanks very much. We're committed to a 60-minute closing time next time around. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot to all.